So today I'm going to be just speaking about something that's very, very close or has become very, very close to my heart. And I think it's many things coming together. It's also, um, it's also from my own personal experience and engagement, as well as I think what I've learned from clients as well. And also when we are in training programs from that interaction where something comes alive in that interaction space and becomes known, and all of that has gone into what is now called and offered as presence oriented. So before I move into that, I just like to take a moment to just pay or just come into a sense of gratitude for everyone before me and from the many wisdom traditions that highlight this, the many therapists that have worked in this area, that have stumbled upon and not just stumbled upon and also illuminated this quite easily, clearly, so in many different ways. So I'd just like to take a moment to honor that, because all our work rests on what has happened earlier, what's happening now, and that's what's coming into what is being offered. And as I do that, I'd just like to invite all of you that maybe we can all come into a sense of grounding, just by feeling your feet on the ground, taking some time to just sense into that contact with the earth. Sensing that contact with the chair. And whatever is here now, whatever other happenings in the body, mind, just allowing it to just rest in this contact with the earth. One of my teachers said that we always have our feet on the ground. We can always return to this sense of contact with the earth, this holding. And we can rest in this holding. We don't need to hold ourselves up. And just bringing a sense of openness and receptivity, coming more into a sense of sensing into the body. By just letting your awareness drop into the body. drop head down into the arms, into the legs. And so from this space, we can just open our eyes and maybe look around. Just taking in where we are. And maybe also taking in the presence of this whole group here. And so as we begin, I'd just like to contextualize mindfulness and the whole movement of mindfulness into therapy, psychotherapy. And it's like, to me, that that when we brought in mindfulness or a contemplative practice into the field, into what is known about psychotherapy, it's like that one drop that we put, and that one drop changes the whole field. It's like that one drop can transmute, change, transform something. And so I'd like to explore with you that one drop, that what is that quality? What is that when we bring mindfulness in, when we bring contemplation into the therapeutics? What is that begins to change, that begins to transmute things? And what are the conditions, perhaps, that we can move into that can allow for that to happen? So this may be something that we are referring to. And I think we've heard this in many different ways from many different people. And we've had maybe a taste of it, a sense of it for our own selves. And this something that we are referring to is this awareness. Awareness that accompanies whatever we are experiencing. And this awareness is what mindfulness moves towards. It's when we are bringing the practice of mindfulness, the whole, I think the starting point is to be mindful, is to develop this capacity of being mindful, so that we can touch into this awareness, this energy of this awareness that's here and that accompanies things. And this awareness has a certain knowing quality. It has a certain clarity. And it also has qualities of the heart, like a sense of warmth or love. I think the best to describe it is a sense of love, an opening of the heart, and yet a sense of groundedness. So all of that being there in terms of feeling grounded, feeling very present, aware of what's happening, of the thoughts, feelings, sensations, aware of this relational field of the presence of the other and what's happening in that relational field. And so, presence-oriented psychotherapy, it's a presence orientation. It's orienting or basing our whole therapeutic work oriented into presence, oriented. So it's the viewing ground, it is the field, it's the base from which we engage in therapeutic work. Right. So therefore, the calling it presence-oriented psychotherapy emphasizes that it's not something that we put as a set of things to do. It's not something that can be boxed as step 1, step 2, step 3. Right? It cannot be put as tools and techniques that we are going to be using, though there are many. Right? But we keep all of that, all that we know, all our skills, everything, all in the background. Another teacher described it as keeping it behind the curtain. Right? You keep it behind the curtain and you're there, present with yourself, with the client, and with what's happening and what's unfolding in a moment-to-moment way. Right? So often there is this whole thing of, what's going to happen next? Right? I don't know how this encounter is going to unfold, but the willingness to be there and see and be curious and say, okay, what's next? So in that sense, a presence-oriented approach to psychotherapy, right? And what I'm bringing in, right, as I've started to offer it over the years, I've realized that it can also be an approach in itself, an approach that will not be boxed, but has certain principles on which it works, on certain universal principles that we can bring into the therapeutic contact and into our relationship with ourselves and our clients. So while it can be an orientation and you can take it with anything else, it is also an approach in and by itself. And the approach it's a very alive, very fluid, moment-to-moment engagement. Okay. And in that engagement, when we are bringing, like I said, this awareness, we are coming in from presence. And at times when the client is also in presence, right? There's this whole field of presence. The transformation is not just for the client, but also for the therapist. In some way, both are restored, both are renewed, both come back to who they are and the deepest core of our being. So it's like really being on this sacred ground with another. So let's look at when I teach this, and in the curriculum, it's like at 3 levels. They're all simultaneous. It's not like one follows the other. But the first is the therapist's presence. That the therapist's presence is paramount to what would kind of affect therapeutic change. The quality of that presence, which is necessarily also embodied. Okay. So while we are talking about presence as this spacious sense, this compassionate sense, a naturally occurring sense of who we are when we drop our judgments, when we drop the doing, when we drop the fixing, that we can naturally touch into the space. So we are bringing in this sense of presence, and the therapist's presence is vital. It's a vital ingredient. The second important ingredient that we emphasize is the presence in the relational field. So what's the quality of that presence and that sense of connection that we feel, that not just that we feel, but the client feels, right? Of feeling heard, of feeling seen, of feeling understood, of feeling held, of feeling welcomed, however they are, whoever they are, however things are showing up, and whatever is showing up feels okay and feels all right to be there. And it feels safe to be with it. Because in some way they're sensing that you're okay with it. Right? So the relational space, and that's the second key ingredient of this therapeutic change that we are looking at. And I'll talk individually about all these aspects. So one is the therapist's presence, one is the presence in the relational field, and the third vital ingredient is what can be supportive to the client coming in touch with their own presence. How can we support the client in coming into their own sense of presence? What can be helpful with that? And we don't need very much, because presence doesn't have to be created. It's there. It's our maybe a reference to the earlier presentation or talk, that it's that foundational ground that we can touch into our very sense of beingness. And so that's always available for the client. So we look at, and I hope we have time to look at systematically, maybe a little bit, maybe not systematically and in depth, but just touching into what can help us with coming into presence ourselves in the therapeutic contact, in the relational field, and how can we support the client of coming into presence. So let's see how we can go with this. So I think the first thing, and I'm sharing that my path to this has been the practice of mindfulness largely. And And I have explored other things and moved in other directions. And I've finally come back, and I keep coming back to just that simplicity of that practice of just being present, or just being here. And yes, there's the breath, and there is this, there is that, that is happening, and just that simplicity of coming back to it again and again. And so I want to talk about these two pathways, because a lot of what comes from mindfulness is from Buddhist psychology. And there are these two pathways. Okay. One pathway, okay, is when we are with the feeling, sensation in the body, right? Or when we are directly in contact with something, and we can move through that sensation, through that feeling, through that thought. And we can touch into that space that is there, which we kind of recognize that this is not a continuous cycle. So what gets solidified as that this is what is happening to me right now in this moment is that the thoughts, feelings, sensations all feel as one blob, right? And we are identified with it. So it's all together. And so in the practice of mindfulness, repeatedly what we are doing is we are first noticing and acknowledging, okay, what's here? What are my thoughts? What are my feelings? What are my sensations? If I'm having this thought, what am I sensing in the body? How am I sensing this in the body? If I'm having this feeling, how am I sensing this feeling in the body right now? Not thinking about it, but a direct sensing of it in the body. And when we are directly sensing it in the body, so we are staying with the sensation, the feeling sensation, not just the sensation, feeling sensation, which has a quality of either aversion in the Buddhist side, the way we see it in therapy is just something that wants to move away from this experience because it feels like it is too much to have, or it's too overwhelming. And that's very right, because those patterns and that formation, at some time when we had them, it did feel too much perhaps, or perhaps we didn't have the right support. And so when we encountered it now as this kind of constriction, this pattern in the body, as a sensation which feels very unpleasant, along with that also arises this something that doesn't want to be. So we might encounter this something within us, right? And this something that doesn't want to be with. And we just acknowledge it as such. Yes, there is maybe this pain, this feeling, or the sensation that's here, and something in me doesn't want to. Something can't be with it. And that's okay. So when we come into it and when there is an easing of that fight with it, right? That's important because we can't push and force ourselves, like be with the sensation, be with what is happening. We can't will ourselves into that. That's just more doing. So we come to a place where it's important, maybe just with a sense of gentleness, just with other practices of somatic practices, that we can just rest with it for a while. We can allow it to be there, and we can also acknowledge what else is going on. What are these different aspects that find it hard to be with us? And acknowledging all of it and staying with that place where we feel this kind of sensation or this feeling and allowing it, allowing that feeling sensation. And as we allow this feeling sensation, we might need to support the physiology as well. In some way, the physiology knows how to move through things. Our body knows how to move through things, but it needs a little support. So we are staying with this and we are being with it, okay, and allowing this whole feeling to be there, feeling sensation to be there in the whole body. And we begin to see, it's, you know, it's not as solid. It begins to move, begins to shift. It's not as solid. It's not as bound up with our thoughts and beliefs and other patterns and thinking. It's not as bound up, and we begin to see that. So what I'm sharing is that this is one route. Okay? The other route is that I notice these thoughts, feelings, sensations happening, right? I'm aware of it. And then I have some way of moving back, not as in away from it, but moving into this awareness itself. Okay? So I'm moving into this awareness, into my presence, which is always okay. There is an inherent sense of okayness when we touch into presence. There is an inherent sense of, all right, everything feels okay. It feels, and we feel resourced. And so moving into that sense of presence and then making contact with what's there. Okay, and that's the other route. Now, both these routes are equally valid in terms of coming into presence. So when we are fully with our feelings and sensations and have it completely, it opens up into this larger, spacious sense of who we are. We don't always recognize it unless sometimes someone says, and then just notice that. And therefore, as therapists, if we are interested in bringing a presence orientation to our work, we need to bring it for ourselves. This is like we can bring it to clients. It's like from the inside out, right? We'll be able to recognize this, that, oh, my client is sensing into this, is sensing into presence, because we are able to recognize the sense of presence in ourselves. Or maybe the client is not into a sense of presence, but is with that struggle that's happening, with that feeling, with that sensation that feels caught up and knotty and, all tight. And we know how that is because we have been with that within ourselves. And we may know through our own navigation of that the client will have the ability and the capacity to navigate through that with some support. So we are not getting locked up in terms of saying, oh, I need to kind of do something for this client. I need to move them out of it. There is an innate sense of trust in the client's capacity to move through this because we have experienced ourselves. Right? Not just alone, but often with another. Often with somebody else holding space for us. And I think that's so important for us as therapists. That someone else that we know what it is like to be received with all our patterns and tendencies. So when we are, and this is all the work, so before the work, that's the way I describe it, the work before the work, right? Our own working with ourselves, our own maybe taking up a practice that works for us. It doesn't have to be mindfulness, but it can be something else. But I think it needs to be a more body-oriented, somatic kind of being in touch, because the body is always the reference point. So even when we are looking at presence, we want to be there in a very grounded, in a very real way. And our body is our ally to let us know what is going on. And what is it that is needed. So the listening in to the body in some form, I think needs to happen for us. And it's not like, oh, I do, some years of training, or I do this program or that program, and then I have it. I may develop some capacity for it, and then it is ongoing work. I think it's work of a lifetime, right? So it's never like, oh, now we've got it, right? Now I've got it. I have it. But I know maybe from the repeated touching into that I can trust that if I just settle into myself, if I just let everything be, just through acknowledging, just staying in touch with my body, just staying grounded like we did initially, I know all that movement of my body mind while I'm there with the client will settle, and I can be more and more present and come into a sense of presence. So initially, we might encounter, and not just initially, all the time, it depends on who we are meeting, what is getting evoked, who's bringing up, something within us, what part within us, right? So And that's why I said it's not like we are done and we are through with it. It's a continuous process. Each client does bring up something new for us to look at. So what we might encounter are, as we are listening to the client, our own tendencies to come in, our own tendencies to fix, our own tendencies to move away from something because it feels too much for us, tendency to give advice. And I think a lot of the times we give advice to somehow kind of make it okay for the other so that we don't have to feel whatever we are feeling in that resonance so strongly. So, in some way, it is to kind of quell our own discomfort. So, a lot of the training is to our inner training, is to maybe the ACT therapist describe it as the psychological flexibility, right? The ability to move with anything, to allow for anything, to not have a fixed kind of like notion of this is how we are moving with it, and to develop a capacity as we go along to all our experiences, whatever might show up, the unpleasant as well as the pleasant. And that's what we're doing actually when we are also practicing mindfulness. Like, for example, when we are taking in a moment of appreciation, right? We are taking in something, we just notice the bird, we notice this wind, we notice the sun on our face, and we just stop and pause and notice that sensation and just be with it and take in this appreciation. We are developing our capacity for this sense of joy and appreciation as much as we are developing our capacity to stay with what feels painful and what feels challenging and so we are developing our capacity for this whole range but by recognizing it and staying with that feeling sensation in the body. And at this point of time, I'd like to say, because a lot of us on this path, sometimes we are very harsh on ourselves. And I know that sometimes I've been harsh on myself, of that I have to kind of like stay with it. It's almost like a punishment, right? Or at least it used to feel like that, like to bear with it. And hidden within that is maybe the urge that if I stay with this, then maybe I won't have it, right? Stay long enough. Hidden within that is I got to be having this kind of pattern, having this kind of feeling or sensation is not okay. It doesn't make me a good therapist. It starts off a dialogue with, who am I then to offer this to others, or things like that. So it can tie up with our own belief patterns. So bringing in a sense of kindness, that it's okay for something to be there. And it's also okay to give myself the permission that this much for now, right? And I can go and do something else. I can engage in something else that feels resourceful at this time. I don't have to stay with it and fight my way through and allow it to kind of unfold. Maybe this much for now, and that's okay. And I can come back to it. I can choose to come back to it later on. But for now, maybe resourcing myself, doing something nurturing for myself. Let me take that. Let me do something like that that feels more restorative. So giving ourselves the permission to not be perfect, to not need to fix ourselves, even for the good of others. That it's okay to be how we are, patterns and all, just as we are. It's enough. And maybe that begins that whole journey of the heart of coming in with that sense of love and compassion for all these things that show up. Just patting ourselves, just letting ourselves escape, just your hands rest on your heart. Just take a moment to do that. To just feel the touch, feel the warmth of it. It's like almost letting something in you know that it's okay. It's all right. I'm here. And as we do this with ourselves, we know how to meet the other with whatever shows up in that moment. So just like this, we are also meeting the other, we're meeting the client with a sense of okayness, with a sense of not just belief, but seeing that they are really indeed okay. There is this place of resource and resilience. And then the third part, and then I'll stop and we go to questions. The third part of supporting the client into their own presence, right? And I think the easiest way to do it is in terms of just being there moment to moment, allow what needs to unfold, and just be curious about what's happening for you there. What's this that's going on? So, not assuming something about what they are experiencing, but really being interested, genuinely interested in what's happening for you. And what is it that is emerging? And how can this be supported that the person will know? So there are two things that I emphasize here. We can do this work with clients in terms of when they are present to themselves and they are in presence, right? So sometimes when we are working with clients, they might not be present because it's challenging to be present. Not because they don't want to, they're not trying hard enough, they're not practicing enough. At this stage, it just either feels too much to be present to that, right? And so we support the client into just being present with their feeling, just a little, to their sensation in the body, just a little. And with us, as we are attuned with the client, as we are resonating with the client, that we are grounded, we are present, And this very act of being present and grounded is going to influence, is going to support the client coming into presence and the client being present. Just the self-regulation, the co-regulation that we know that happens. Because something in them starts to resonate with our state of being. Something in them starts to align there in their physiology as well. As we stay grounded, as we stay regulated, it supports the regulation of their own physiology as well. And they get more and more present. So how can we support the client coming, being present? And how can we support the clients? And again, both ways, because it's hard sometimes to just be with that feeling and sensation because it just feels too much. And it needs to feel safe to be in the body. And that may take a while. Right? So there's no rush, there's no hurry. It is the client's process and the intelligence in the client to move towards this inherent sense of wholeness that's already here. So our job is simply to listen to that, to what is it that is unfolding there, and support that. Because we will naturally move towards this sense of wholeness. And maybe that also may not be so accurate because there is already that sense of wholeness. And sometimes it is also saying that, okay, this feeling that's arising, this resistance that is arising, within this, there is also a sense of wholeness. There is nothing amiss going on. This part that shows up, that's resisting, that too inherently has the seed of this, of our innate goodness, our wholeness, whatever you want to call it. Within each and every experience, there is that. That's what we are coming into when we are staying moment to moment, allowing it to unfold. And recognizing it, and then just bringing it there for the client to also recognize it. And that's all that there is to do. Through our own recognition, we bring that recognition to the. And so, in some way, this approach of presence-oriented psychotherapy, it's not about doing, it's not about fixing, but I think it's also about finding our way back home and supporting the client to find their way back home. So we'll stop here. I haven't left much time for questions, but maybe we can just take a pause and if there are questions, we can take them up. Or maybe we can just take a pause right now and just see what's here for you. And then you can just simply put that in the chat. And if there is a question, you can just put it. But I think more important than questions is just sensing and feeling right now. Just seeing what's here. What am I present to right now? And how am I sensing that in the body? And just give that some time. Feeling your feet on the ground. Feeling your seat. And allowing everything to rest as it might, let it fall as it might. Like after it stops raining, and then there are the drops of water falling to the ground. Just allow things to just be there as it might. Coming into a sense of grounding, feeling your feet, feeling this contact with the chair. Just making gentle movements of the body. And maybe just letting your hand just rest on your heart. Just as a way of acknowledging the presence. Just taking some time to just be. Nothing to do. Nothing to keep. Just feeling and sensing into. Maybe as we end, I'd like to play a song. Maybe many of you have this, and so I just invite you to just stay as long as you wish.
Nothing to seek, nothing to gain, nothing to know, nothing to lose, nothing to do but let go. Let's rest here, where the future and the past disappear. Here, in the sanctity of now. Nothing to prove, nothing to own, no one to be, nowhere to move, already home, already free. Let's just stay in the cave of the heart today and bask in this ever-present love. Nothing to fix, nothing to change, nothing to fight. Only what is. What if what is just right? Why not trust this mystery living us and rest in the refuge of the self? Nothing to judge, no one to blame or fear. Only my face greeting me in the mirror. Nowhere to turn, nowhere to hide, nobody else, nothing outside, that isn't inside myself. Let's just see, is anyone here but me? Here in the present moment now. Nothing to know, nothing to do, no one to be, nowhere to go, already home, already free. Nowhere to go, already home, already free. Nowhere to go, already home, already free.
All right. Thank you.